I just want to say that by now, alhamdulillah, it's week 9. As you can see there, week 9. In case you didn't know, alhamdulillah, inshallah, people are learning quite a bit and they're benefiting from the classes. Now, probably everyone is going to fall into one of 3 categories. The first category that you might fall into is, mashallah, you're benefiting from the classes, you're attending, you're inspired, your life has been changing around, inshallah, with the things that you've learned, and things are going great. So hopefully, inshallah, that's the case for most people. The second group of people will kind of fall into the category where, they're benefiting from the classes, they're learning, but they're finding that it's getting to be difficult now. Not that the content is difficult, but keeping up with the commitment every week is becoming difficult. And there are strains on your life. There are things going on at work. There are things going on in your family that's making it very difficult. And you kind of feel like, you know what? I don't even know. It's only 2 weeks left, but it's just so difficult. I didn't keep up with the last 2 quizzes or the last 1 quiz, and I'm getting behind. And I don't, know if I should even just keep up with it or not. And the final exam's coming up, and that's worth 50% of my grade, and it's going to take such a long time to, study for it and everything like that. It's going to be very difficult for me. So that's the second category of people. And my advice to them is that, number 1, renew your intention. Renew your intention and remember why you came here in the first place. Think about the benefit that you're actually getting from the classes, how it's changing your life, and just think about how you would be affected by the fact that had you stopped or had you not continued, how you would actually feel afterwards. And then you'd have to start again or all of those things. Just think about that and try and stay motivated. This happens to everybody. It's not something that's only happening to you. It's not something that's only happening to students in this class. Anyone who's studying something that is not, you could say, dunya related, where you're being pressured from every side that you have to, finish this. Otherwise, you'll never get married, and you'll never get a job, and you'll never get this. All of those things, those pressures, it's not the same, because it's kind of like almost seen as an optional thing. So my advice to you is stick with it, and just suck it up, and just go with it, and just try and finish, and do the best you can. And inshallah, you will have your spring break after the final exam, and you will have an entire week to relax before the next quarter starts. So inshallah, don't worry about that. Now the third category of people probably will be those people who are benefiting from the class. They're probably taking 2 or 3 classes, but this is the first time that they've really taken intensive classes and everything. And you'll find other people who are close to you starting to give you heat for it. And saying, you know what, you're attending those classes, you think you're more pious than us now. Yeah, I'm telling you, it's going to happen. You'd be surprised. Anyone ever heard of this happening, whether it's not you or not? Anyone heard of it happening? Yeah, 50% right there. It's going to happen to at least some people. And they're going to tell them, you're wasting your time. There's so many better things you could do. You could be working, you could be making more money, you could go to that party, you could, do so many other things. And they're going to try and demotivate you and try and get you away from actually coming to the classes. So my advice to those people is also stick with it. And don't listen to, people are going to go and say lots of things. And you know that the stuff that you've already learned so far is that those people who are telling you these things, they don't know the stuff that you learned so far. They don't know, and they haven't benefited from those things. And if you ask them something that, they wouldn't know more than half of what you've learned in this class already. Right? So don't listen to them. They're not examples for you. Don't let them get underneath your skin. These are whispers that are going to come. Some of them may be sincere, perhaps, but they're misled, or they're not understanding the situation. Some of them are doing it out of envy or out of jealousy because you're going and doing something that's good, and they're just not up there, and they're just not keeping up with that. So don't let these things get to you. Okay? No, I'm talking about Muslims. You'll be surprised that Muslims will try to demotivate you from these classes more than non-Muslims. Am I right or wrong? Those Muslims who know what I'm talking about, they know exactly. This is the truth. Your non-Muslims will motivate you to come more than your Muslims will motivate you to come. Unfortunately. It's true. Who knows it's true? Who feels that's true? Yeah, it's true. That's unfortunate. But don't let it get you down. Don't let it get you down. Stick with it. Keep it up. And I think the fourth category was those people who are seeing that, the final exam is coming and, it's just going to be too much work and, study and I haven't kept up and all of these things. You can do it. I'm telling you, you can do it. Okay, I got the real fourth category. The real fourth category is that some people feel that, I could have done so much better in this class. If I would have put more time, if I would have put more effort. And I feel like I should actually repeat this class because I can learn a lot more. And there's a lot of things that I wanted to learn in this class that were taught, but I didn't really grasp them 100%. So I want to repeat the class. And if the class is being offered, and it's being offered again. And you say, well, but people are going to say, what's wrong with you? You passed the class. You got the grades, you passed the class. Why would you take the class again? It doesn't make any sense. Let me just tell you briefly about a friend of mine who was studying with me in India from a very rich, politician family and everything, grew up very spoiled, but alhamdulillah, he, had a desire to go and study in this Islamic school in Lucknow. So he finished the first year, and after he finished the first year, he felt, he passed. And his grades were like medium. He passed with 70% or something like that. And he said, there's so many things in this first year that I didn't learn fully. And I feel that it's so important, I want to repeat this year. And some of the teachers said, why would you repeat the year? You passed better than other students and they're continuing the next year. And he said, no, you know what? I'm here to learn. My main intention was to learn and I missed out some very important stuff. I'm going to do it again. And he did the entire first year of class again, even though he passed. Then he went in second year. Second year, he was all right. He went in third year. After the third year, he said, you know what? These books that we study, I feel I didn't get them properly. I'm going to repeat the third year. So he repeated the third year again. So he finished the school while repeating the first year, even though he passed. He repeated the third year, even though he passed. Then he went in, then I actually met up with him again in England last year. Just happened to be in the same school. He did his first master's degree. Then he did his second master's degree. He just finished his third master's degree. And now he's finishing up his PhD. He said, why did you get so many master's degrees? Why didn't you just go straight into PhD? He said, because I was trying to find the one subject that I really want to, I'm passionate about, trying to find which field I want to focus in. And for me, I don't regret anything that I've done. Every dissertation I had to do for the master's, I benefited from it. And he did amazing. His first master's was on the Crusaders and Salahuddin Ayyubi. Very interesting master's thesis. His second one was something about Islamic finance. Whether or not the 2009 financial crash, would have been averted by certain Islamic economic models or not. And his third dissertation was, I forgot what it was on, something like that. And now he's doing his PhD. The point is that there are people who are very serious and very sincere about learning, and that's the way we should be. Even though ideally we cannot always be that way, we want to, move forward. But if that's the goal, is that it's just about learning and making sure that you've learned the things correctly. Don't hesitate and don't be shy, and don't shy away from doing these kind of things. Okay, so that's, inshallah, that's my advice to myself when I'm studying, and my advice to everyone else, inshallah ta'ala. Any questions before we begin? All right, inshallah, let's begin. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. So, we left off by talking about a group of Muslims who had been sent after the Battle of Uhud to some tribes, and they were ambushed and they were murdered. Right? We left off talking about that. And we saw how people were taking advantage of the Muslims after their loss in the Battle of Uhud. So now we're going to cover the expulsion of Nadir, the Battle of the Trench, dealing with the traders of Qurayza, Treaty of Hudaybiyah, how Islam spread, and the siege of Khaybar, and the expedition of Mu'tah. So what you notice here, before we move forward, you notice there's a lot of political dealings, right? There's a lot of wars, and there's like a treaty, and the rest of them are pretty much battles. Now the thing we have to understand is this. Sometimes people will look at this history, and they say, it seems like it's a lot about just battles and battles. In Mecca, there weren't so many battles. Obviously, we understand why. But the thing is, people say, there's so many wars and all of these things. Why does the life of the Prophet look like it's all about wars? Right? What is the reasoning behind that? And the reasoning behind that is because when you're studying history, you're trying to study the most important events that had a great impact generally on the lives of the most people around there. That's the way history is generally written. So otherwise you could write the history of every one individual, and you could write volumes and volumes about what that person did in their day, and what food they ate, and how they talked to the other person. But the thing is, even when we're studying the life of the Prophet, even though we're focusing in, sometimes we're zooming in on certain actions that he did, generally the zoomed in character of the Prophet is going to be in a separate category, like we talked about in the beginning. It's going to be a separate category of hadith. His statements, his sayings, his character, those kind of things, they kind of fall in another category. The seerah, the life of the Prophet as a genre, is supposed to give us like a bird's eye view of what's taking place. And the bird's eye view of what's taking place tends to focus on events that have a very great impact for all the people in a certain region, or the most amount of people in a certain region. Now, what influences people's lives more than what takes place politically, such as wars, such as treaties that are signed, such as all of these things? They have major ramifications. There are other things that are taking place here and there as well at the same time. But the reason why a lot of books, or most books you will find, focusing on these battles and all of this, is because they have major ramifications. And any history book you look at, it's going to focus on the political events for the most part. Now, people are trying to write history with little different angles, more economic, scientific achievements, all of that, and which is a good thing. It adds more variety. But politics is never going to be divorced from history because it affects people so greatly. So anyways, that's just an introduction to why we have so many of these battles and stuff being recorded and being given prominence and being given importance. And outside of that, on top of that, the Quran mentions almost all of these events as well, which means that they're very significant and they had very significant impacts. Okay, so let's take a look at the expulsion of Nadir. We already talked about the Banu Qaynuqa, who were a Jewish tribe who was living inside of Medina. Now we're in the month of Rabi' al-Awwal, in the 4th year after the Hijrah, after the migration. The Prophet ﷺ receives intelligence that the Jews of the Banu Nadir are about to betray the Muslims and somehow plot against them. So what does the Prophet ﷺ do? He does the same thing that he did with the Qaynuqa. What did he do with them? He went and he visited them to figure out what's going on. Is something wrong? Is something taking place? And the same thing what he did with the Bani Qaynuqa, when he went to visit them, he didn't let them know what was happening. He didn't let them know that I've received some information that you're planning on betraying us, but he wants to go and see what is the relationship like. So when he went to go and visit them, in order to set things right, in order to make it seem like, make sure everything's going fine, there's no issues between us, they actually tried to assassinate him. They actually tried to kill him by making him sit in a certain room and saying, we'll be right back in a minute, and trying to drop a boulder from the top on top of him and kill him. But he was informed about the plot. He was informed about the plot, and he left. While some of his companions were sitting there, he got up and he left and he went back to Medina. His companions are still sitting there. Their lives were not in danger, right? It's only his life that was in danger. He got up and he walked away, and they're sitting there looking. Prophet just left. He just got up and walked out. We don't know where he went. And later on, he informed them, they were trying to kill me. That I received information, perhaps through revelation or through some other source, that they were actually trying to kill me. So what happens? The Prophet ﷺ makes it very clear that if you're going to put an attempt on my life, then we're going to have a problem. So what did he do? He issued an ultimatum to them. And the ultimatum that he issued was, you have 10 days to leave, and you can take all your possessions with you. All right? This is what's going to happen. Because you tried to kill me now. So this is the opportunity that they had. Now what could they have done? They could have tried to negotiate a treaty with him, one option. They could have tried to ask him for, some type of leniency or whatever. Give us a month to think about it. We need more time than just 10 days. They could have done a number of things. But what did they do? they insisted on war. And they said, go ahead, we're well prepared. They fortified themselves in their castles and in their barracks and all of these things, and they were ready for war. Now, before they made for war, they started making alliances with some of the other Arabs inside and outside of Medina. Very similar to the Qaynuqa, who made alliances with the hypocrites, who thought that they would come and actually help them. So they thought that this is the opportunity that we have, we're going to go ahead and take it. So the Prophet ﷺ acted very fast, and immediately he went and he besieged their fortress. So besieging the fortress, as we mentioned before, you surround it, you try and cut off supplies going inside, coming outside, you try and cut off communications. So he besieged the fortress, and they were not giving up. So they were not giving up for quite a while. So what did the Prophet ﷺ do? He ordered that the palm trees, the largest and the tallest palm trees that they have, that they be cut down. Now, why would he do this? What's the point of cutting down a palm tree? The poor tree didn't do anything. Exactly. The palm trees were their greatest possession and their asset that they had, because they were growing fruits, and this was a very verdant land. So he made it very clear that we're going to keep on cutting them down until you have nothing left. So there's no point in you sitting there keeping up a battle. Your goal, why don't you just go ahead and surrender? Now, this was the only instance where the Muslim army has actually cut down trees. The reason is because normally the commands have been issued that no one in battle is allowed to cut down any trees. No one is allowed to kill the elderly. No one is allowed to kill children. No one is allowed to kill women. No one is allowed to kill non-combatants. And priests and all of that come later as well, right? So the thing is, generally it's against Islam to cut down the trees. But in this case, there was an exception to the rule. And this exception to the rule has actually been mentioned in the Quran in chapter 59, specifically, as an exception to the rule. During battle. During battle without necessity. Meaning, because what ends up happening, most armies, what do? They just come in and they just devour everything, right? Most armies, classical as well as modern, even the ones who claim to be, humanistic and all of that, they're just either they're dropping bombs, or even in the old times, what was the policy of the North against the South in the Civil War? They had a term for it. What was it called? Scorched earth, right? Scorched earth policy. So we think of the people who are fighting against the slave owners, right? What was their policy actually? The North were going into the South, scorched earth. You kill everything, you wipe out the entire town. Most people don't, we don't study that in high school. But if you go and study the Civil War outside of your public school education, right? You actually go and you learn what really took place, what really happened. So it's scorched earth policy. In Islam, we're not allowed to do that. We don't go and we don't just start killing out animals and just killing anything you see, just start killing it, cutting down trees and just burning everything. You don't do that. But here, there was a specific reason. The reason was that they wanted these people to surrender so that there wouldn't be a battle taking place, more lives wouldn't be lost. So specifically, it was even mentioned in the Quran that the reason why the trees were cut down was in order to pressure them to surrender. So this was a tactic that was used, and actually it worked after a while. And finally, the Nadir, they surrendered after a period of time. So the same thing that the previous tribe did. So the Qaynuqa, what did they do? They said when they surrendered, normally what ends up happening when you surrender something like that, you're going to be punished. You'll be punished in a certain way because you lost the battle. But they surrendered now because they were fighting. What did they do? They started asking for leniency. So they wanted leniency because they saw that the Qaynuqa, they also got some leniency as well. So they said, okay, we would like to have some leniency as well. Let's make a negotiation. But here's the thing. We have to understand the difference between the Qaynuqa and the difference between the Nadir. Two different Jewish tribes, they acted in two different ways. So the problem with the Qaynuqa was, what did they do? What was their crime? What was the problem? They were hostile to the Prophet, and they harassed the lady, that's one thing. What else? They broke the treaty, right? They were planning on breaking the treaty, and on top of that, they declared war, and then they were hostile to that woman in the marketplace, right? So their crime was that they broke the treaty, right? And they went to war with the Muslims. Here, the crime is different because they actually attempted to murder the Prophet ﷺ. So it's different. So it's not the same thing, right? And they were given the opportunity to leave with their belongings. Right? So they had all of opportunities, but this didn't happen. Right? They insisted on war. Now, what else happened? The Prophet ﷺ had saw that the captives in Badr that they ransomed, what did they end up doing? Those were the same people, after they ransomed them out, they came back in the battle of Uhud and they started fighting. So they said, you know what? You have to be careful. If we just go and do the same thing every single time, these people are going to come back and they're going to fight us again. So now what does he do? The Prophet ﷺ should actually be harsher and stricter on these people because their crime is much worse. But the Prophet ﷺ's leniency, his mercy, the way that he was something amazing, something that's very difficult to find. So what did he do? He said, we still give you the same thing. You're allowed to leave with whatever belongings you can carry. So before, you go ahead and you can leave with all your belongings. The only difference now is, whatever you can carry, you're allowed to go ahead and take all those things. Whatever you can't carry, you're not going to be able to come back for those things. So they packed up and they relocated themselves. And where did they go? Most of them kind of went up north, relocated in different areas, and a lot of them, they went to a heavily fortified city known as Khaybar. And it's very important to remember the city. And it's important to remember that the Nadir actually went to Khaybar, because we're going to see Khaybar coming up in a little bit. And this is a city which is about a few hundred miles to the north of Medina. And instead of thinking that, the Prophet actually was merciful on us, he actually went easy on us, let's go ahead and leave him alone, immediately they began to plot and they began to conspire with the Quraysh against the Muslims. So this is where we are right now. This is how the Battle of the Trench begins. So the Battle of the Trench. Now Huyay, a man by the name of Huyay, was the chief of Nadir, who had been kicked out, and he settled in Khaybar. What did he do? He went immediately to Mecca, and he started riling up the Quraysh and saying, you know what, they kicked us out too. We're with you, we're going to team up with you. We need to get rid of these Muslims once and for all. So he incited them to go and make one final attack against Mecca and wipe out the Muslims, once and for all. So this was his strategy, this was his plan. The Quraysh obviously are very willing, because the last time they had fought had been when? Battle of Uhud. So it's been a few years. They've got their revenge at Uhud, but the threat of Islam is not lost still. They're still upset. They don't want to make a peace treaty with the Muslims. They still want to get rid of the Muslims. So they go ahead and they buy into the rhetoric that Huyay put up there. And he came up with a great idea. He said, look, let's attack Medina together. So I will get the Jews from one side. I will help you recruit some other Arab tribes. You recruit as many allies as you can. And it's not just you versus the Muslims anymore. We ally with all the other tribes and we go and attack Medina at once. We'll surround them and we'll completely wipe them off the map. So the Quraysh agreed, and they started recruiting different people. They started recruiting different tribes, preparing for battle. So they managed to recruit a lot of people. They from themselves, they came up with 4,000 soldiers. 4,000 well-equipped, heavily armed soldiers. And they had another 6,000 soldiers coming from the eastern part of Arabia, which is called Najd, which we had seen before. Now, what was Najd? What happened in this eastern part? Who remembers? Yes, the killing of the preachers, of those learned companions. They were on their way to the region of Najd in the east. And that's when they were killed. So these people are very happy. They have no hesitation to team up with the Quraysh and to eliminate the Muslims. If they're going to eliminate the people who are on the path, they're willing to eliminate them in their own city. So they realized this is a great opportunity for us. And they had even more people. So this is only 4,000 from Quraysh, 6,000 from the other side. They probably had even more than that, but the numbers are not given specifically. They had more Jewish tribes coming and fighting as well. So what ended up happening? They came and they're on their way, 10,000 plus strong man army on its way to Medina to destroy it, to completely eliminate Medina and remove the Muslims from the face of the earth. Now, as soon as the Prophet ﷺ, he received the news that the Quraysh army is on its way and that they're planning this giant attack against us, he called all his companions and he began to consult with them. So he started asking them, what do you recommend we do? Remember in the Battle of Badr, did he consult with them? He consulted with them, right? He consulted with them in terms of what to do, right? Where to go, and they said, yeah, we're going to take the wells, right? In the Battle of Uhud, did he consult with them? Yes, that's one clear, right? He consulted with them. Where did he want to stay? He wanted to stay inside the city. Now he's consulting with them again and deciding, should we stay inside the city? Or should we go outside to meet them? Or what else should we do? So this is a 10,000 man army. This is a really big thing. So what did they decide to do? First of all, they gathered up how many men they could get together. They gathered up 3,000 soldiers. And they said, we're 3,000 versus over 10,000 or more. We don't know which side we're going to be attacked on. So what should we do? A man by the name of Salman al-Farisi comes up with an idea. Salman al-Farisi is from Persia, right? So he's from Persia, and he grew up over there. Now, Persia is one of the how many empires that are really powerful in that region? The two. Which is the other one? The Romans, right? So these are the people who have the technology, they have the military strategy. These are the people who have a lot of experience. So he grew up over there, and he remembered one tactic. He said, I remember that when they were being attacked by cavalry, then what we used to do is we used to dig a trench around the city. Now that would apply sometimes, and it wouldn't apply sometimes in the Persians and the Romans. Why wouldn't it apply when you're fighting the Persians and the Romans sometimes? Because they have something else. What do they have? Catapult, right? They had the catapult technology. At this time, the Quraysh, some books document that the Muslims had the catapult technology near the end of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, but it wasn't very common. And they probably were not bringing it with, especially it's not easy to drag a catapult from Mecca all the way to Medina, hundreds of miles away. So it's not likely that they're going to be able to use this technology. So that means if we dig a trench around the city of Medina, we're going to be fine. So Salman comes up with this idea, and he goes and he stands up on the hill, and he looks around the city of Medina, and he sees that, Medina has a lot of hills. There's a lot of hills in one side, and on one side there's actually a lava tract. So there's mountains, and this is like mountains that have been, there used to be a volcano there. So this is a land that horses cannot cross very easily. And the number one strategy, or the number one technology, you can say, the number one fighting power that the Quraysh had was cavalry, because cavalry is very fast. You could be on the horse, you could have your armor and everything, and you can attack the people very fast. So the thing is, cavalry is used as a very good strategy. So what did they decide to do? They said, what we're going to do is we're going to dig a trench around the unfortified parts of the city. And it actually was not as much as people think. They literally didn't dig a trench around the entire city, because the entire city was partly covered with mountains on this side, and it was covered with some hills over here, lava tract over here. They knew that the Quraysh, when they're coming up, there's a certain path that you have to travel in order to get to the city, because the desert, as we think in in movies and stuff, it's just like all sand. Okay? That's not the way Arabian desert is, right? It's just not all sand. There's a lot of mountains, there's a lot of hills. It's not that easy. You have to take certain routes. So there's certain ways you can go. So they knew that if the Meccans are coming, which direction are they coming, by the way? Are they coming north? Are they moving south to Medina or west to Medina? North to Medina. So they're moving north to Medina, right? So there's a certain direction in which they have to go. And the Muslims know exactly that direction, where they're going to arrive. So they dig a trench around those unfortified parts of the city, and the rest of it is automatically fortified by mountains. So if they wanted to, they could get the people, the foot soldiers, to climb up over the hills and over the mountains, but you could take them out easily with what? With arrows, right? With arrows. So this is a great idea. So they decide that, they're going to go ahead and take this idea, even though the idea came from a foreigner. Now there's an important lesson to learn here. Salman was a foreigner, right? Now these are Arabs who are very, you could say, nationalistic. These are people who love their culture. Remember what the term Arab actually meant? What does Arab actually mean? One of the definitions of Arab. It means someone who can express themselves. Someone who can express themselves, because they used to be so proud of their linguistic ability, their artistic ability of saying words. Arab, one of the meanings actually means someone who's eloquent, someone who's able to express what they're thinking. And the opposite of Arab is an Ajam. And ajam is the opposite of Arab. Ajam actually means dumb. It means literally dumb, people who can't speak, right? So for them, everyone who's not Arab is ajam, meaning they're not eloquent, they can't even make poetry, they can't express how they're feeling in the same way that Arabs can. So these are people who are very, very proud of their culture. And yet, the Prophet ﷺ teaches the companions a great lesson, is that even if an idea that's a good idea, that's a beneficial idea for the Muslims, even if it comes from a foreigner, we have no hesitation in taking that idea. We're not going to go and start saying, I don't like, the type of food that Salman eats because he's a Persian or something like that. We're not going to take his ideas. This was not something that was thought at that time. So the Prophet ﷺ didn't have any, so that's a very important lesson, because today, due to certain nationalism, people are hesitant to take certain ideas or take certain technology or study certain things because they're dominated by one particular ethnic group. And they say, no, we don't do that because that's not our ethnic group. The Prophet ﷺ never did that. So this idea was accepted by all the Muslims in the city, and all the Muslims began to dig. So they started digging this trench. Now they don't have much time. They have about 2 weeks, because it's such a giant army. There's so many allies. They're going to make a strategy, and they're going to decide which way they're going to attack. So they started digging and digging and digging the entire time. 2 weeks of full-time effort, they were digging. And by the end of that, they had a 15-foot deep trench, which virtually surrounded every space in the city that needed to be surrounded, that needed to have a trench. So it's a very deep and a very wide trench. So basically, it can accomplish two things. Number one, cavalry cannot jump over it. So for the most part, no horse is going to be able to jump this length of thing. And if a foot soldier wants to go, they have to stop, jump in the trench, then they have to get to the other side and kind of climb up. By that time, you could just, you could just take them out with an arrow, or you could step on their hands while they're climbing up, whatever it is, right? It's very, very difficult. So you have a great defensive measure, right? Great defense. Now the thing is, the Prophet ﷺ, while he was, giving this idea out, he was not sitting in the back and just ordering the people and saying, you, Abu Bakr, go dig. And you, Amr, go over there and pick up that thing and go do this. He was on the forefront, and he himself was digging with everybody else. And again, like the way the Prophet ﷺ was making the masjid with everyone else, he was also digging. Now digging is a very difficult thing. It's very strenuous. It's a very difficult task, but he was participating with everyone else, which shows you, again, he is not the leader who just cuts the ribbon with the scissors. He was there. Now some of the people, some of the companions, it was very, very difficult for them. So some of them started complaining, and some of the hypocrites, they started complaining as well. The hypocrites are still in Medina here. So they started complaining, and they said, "Oh Prophet, we're so hungry. They didn't even have enough food to eat at this time." Their 100% focus was on digging the trench. So they said, "Oh Prophet, we don't even have enough food to eat. We're so hungry." So what they started doing was that they started tying a big rock around their stomach, just so that they can, keep off the pangs of hunger. So they can feel like they're kind of full, the stomach won't be growling and all of that. So they said, "Look, we're even tying a rock. We're even tying a rock. So what do? The Prophet ﷺ, he lifted up his shirt and he said, "I got 2 rocks." Right? I'm doing the same thing. It shows you the Prophet ﷺ was on the forefront. He was on the forefront of doing all of these things. So this is a role model. This is an example that we should also be getting our hands dirty sometimes. We should also be doing these things. Now another thing we have to understand is that the Muslims are going up against an army when they are in a position of weakness. Right now, they had just lost the battle of Uhud. The preachers had been murdered. They got rid of the Nadir out of there. But now, still, they're in a state of weakness. So they don't even have that much wealth. They don't even have that much money. So they had what was the army that they had? They had, how many soldiers did we say they had? 3,000, okay. They had 3,000 soldiers, right? They've never had this many soldiers before, right? They've never had this many soldiers. So this is the most soldiers that they've ever had. But the problem is, you still have hypocrites in Medina. So what did the hypocrites start doing? The hypocrites realized, we got this giant army coming. We're gonna die, right? So we're out of here, right? We're just gonna go in the back of the city. Actually, you can't go in the back of the city because you're gonna die on the other side. So we're gonna go in the middle of the city, and we're gonna just hide ourselves and pretend like we were inside the house. because this is a good opportunity. Because usually when you're on a battlefield, if you're out in the middle of nowhere, Uhud, Badr, something like that, where are you going to hide? Like, we're going to run behind a mountain or something? Here you're in the middle of the city. They said, this is a great opportunity for us to escape from the battle when people are not looking and go hide in the houses. So the hypocrites were getting out, and they were, moving and trying to escape. So this is a problem. As soon as the coalition army arrived, and that's why, by the way, this battle of the trench, it's also known as the battle known as Al-Ahzab, which means the allies or the coalition army. It means a group of people who banded together in order to attack the Muslims, because not just Quraysh. So the battle of trench, what's known as the battle of Khandaq, meaning the trench, is also known as the battle of the allies. Okay, the allies who teamed up against the Muslims. So when the coalition army arrived, they were shocked. They've never seen anything like this, because they'd never fought the Persians directly. They've never seen this strategy. So this was a really great strategy, and they were shocked and they didn't know what to do. So they pitched their tents and they camped outside for a while, and they were thinking, what should they do? So the Quraysh, they also know, they're not fools. So they started saying, okay, you know what, we're gonna think of strategy. So the strategy that they think of is, what we're gonna do is we're gonna send most of our army to the north of Medina and start attacking from that front. What's gonna happen is that the Muslims will have to start defending, so they'll send most of their troops to the north of the city as well. The south of the city will remain open, and then we can regroup and we can attack from the south with some other soldiers. So their goal is to draw the Muslim soldiers up to the north so that they can go and attack from the south. Now you have a backup plan for the Muslims as well, but it's not a great backup plan. The problem is that the Banu Qurayza, which is another Jewish tribe, are living in Medina and they're living on the south. So now they signed an agreement with the Muslims that they would be there when Medina is attacked. They all protect the city together, right? Because they all live in the same city. Now the question is, should the Muslims and should the Prophet and the Muslims, should they rely on the Banu Qurayza to keep the southern defenses intact or not? So based upon experience, we have to figure out what's going on, right? It's very important to figure out whether they're going to be with us or whether they're not, right? So they were the only one that remained. Now, Huyay, the leader of the Nadir, who had convinced the Quraysh to come out in the first place, he actually came with the army. And he sent a messenger and he said, I want to meet with the leader of the Banu Qurayza. And he met with the leader and he pressured him. He said, you know what, you need to do this. And the leader of Qurayza defected as well. And he said, okay, we're going to join the allies. You go ahead, we're not going to do anything. You go ahead, cross the trench, walk into the city of Medina from the south, where we are. We'll let you in completely, and you can go ahead and attack the Muslims from the back. The ones who are focusing all the forces on the north. So what happened? The Prophet ﷺ heard about the treachery. Intelligence reached him that the Qurayza had defected. So when the news reached him, he sent some archers to go and defend the south, but he concealed the information from the army. But before he sent the archers, a very interesting story happened. He sent some people to go and check whether or not the news is true. Is it true that the Banu Qurayza had defected away from the Muslim army and they've conspired against them? So he sent one messenger and he said, when you come back to me, he knew that he's going to be surrounded by his companions and they're all prepared for battle. So he said, when you come back with the news, if the news is good that they didn't betray us, go ahead and tell everyone openly. But if the news is bad that they've betrayed us, do not tell the news openly, because all the Muslims are going to lose heart. Just imagine if the Muslims are attacked by a 10,000 army and then they find out that the Qurayza have defected against them. It's going to be very difficult for their, to deal with that, right? It demotivates you. So he said, don't demotivate them. Use some kind of code language. Use some kind of code word. So they said, fine. The messenger went, he found out that Banu Qurayza had actually defected and betrayed the Muslims. When they came back, the Prophet ﷺ said, what's the news? So they said, Udal wa qara. And the Prophet ﷺ, he smiled and he said, okay, good. What does Udal wa qara mean? I mean, you have to think a little bit. What does the code word mean? Udal, mashallah. Udal, The tribes of Adal and Qara killed the Muslim preachers. They ambushed them and they betrayed the Muslims. So basically the code word was betrayal, just like Adal and Qara. So the Prophet ﷺ got it, and instead what did he do? He smiled and he said, good. Because he didn't want to upset the people. So everyone's saying, oh yes, yeah, good news. And something great is happening. But if something great was not happening, he realized it was a problem. So then he sent archers. So he sent the archers over there in order to make sure that even though the Banu Qurayza have defected, they can still hold off their their defensive positions over there. So what ended up happening? A few of the Quraysh soldiers actually managed to jump over part of the trench, because most of the trench was there, but they were digging so fast, they didn't have measuring tools. So some parts of where they dug was a little bit more narrow than the larger parts. And sometimes you're having to dig like around a rock, around a mountain or something like that. You can't make every part equal. This is not a 100% coordinated effort. So some people actually, some of the cavalry, they managed to jump over part of the trench. They managed to jump over. But alhamdulillah, there were some Muslims who were there. They managed to intercept them. They had a duel, and one of them, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he was one of the people who had a duel, and he slayed one of the most powerful fighters among Quraysh, who actually managed to jump over. So they managed to hold them off, at least for a while. This is pretty much where we are right now. Now the siege lasted for an entire month. I want you to think about that. An entire month of being surrounded, every single day, every night, having to keep guard, especially night. Night is difficult, right? Because people are going to come and try and sneak, jump into the trench and like sneak over and get inside the city. And some people did sneak into the city. And the Muslims had to deal with those few people who got through, who snuck into the city. And in fact, there's even reports that some of the women dealt with some of the soldiers. One soldier who managed to get in, even some of the women managed to go and take those guys out. Right? So this is a great thing. One of them actually chopped off the guy's head, and when the other soldiers were coming from the back, she knew that if she shows herself, the guy's going to be like, oh, that's just a woman. So she killed the guy, cut off his head, and she threw the head out. So the soldiers looked like, okay, there's an army over there. We're going to go this way. So they walked away. So this is an interesting thing. It's a very interesting battle that took place. So not really a battle, more of a siege. Lasted for an entire month. Now what ended up happening after a month, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided they've done their part now. They've showed their faith. They've showed their determination that they're going to keep up. They're not going to retreat. They're not going to say, okay, we give up our Islam. We're ready to, start worshiping, Hubal or something like that. They didn't start doing all of these things. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided now the test is over for them. So He began to send a very cold wind. So there was a cold wind. It was like a hurricane taking place, sandstorm, all of these things. And the supplies were running out. Imagine the allies, the Quraysh are far from Mecca. A 1-month siege takes a lot of supplies, especially for such a giant army. And they're not making any headway. They're not getting into the city because they're being stuck outside the city. So all the supplies are starting to run out. Food is starting to run out. So what did they decide? So that was one difficulty that they were facing. The second difficulty that they were facing was that they started betraying each other. So what ended up happening was, in fact, one of the Muslims, one guy who was very, respected, he came to the Prophet ﷺ, he managed to reach him, and he said, oh, Messenger of Allah, I've accepted Islam in secret. But nobody knows that I'm a Muslim yet. But I have a very good standing amongst my people. He was a really, he's an old man, but he had a very high standing amongst Quraysh and amongst everyone else. So he said, what do you want me to do? How can I help? Now the thing is, this is very interesting. Because this man, the Prophet ﷺ could have told him and said, you know what? Here's a sword, here's some armor, put it on, and we got one more man in the army. That would have done nothing. That wouldn't have achieved anything. So what did he do instead? He said, you have a good standing among your people. What I want you to do is I want you to sow discord between these two armies. Between these allies, whoever allies together, the Jewish tribe, and then the people from Najd, and then the Quraysh, I want you to sow some discord and make them fight amongst each other so that they get out of here. So he said, O Messenger of Allah, am I allowed to lie? He said, I'm going to need a strategy here. This is a Muslim now. This is a guy who actually cares whether he's lying or not. The Quraysh wouldn't care. right? The people of Najd wouldn't care. He's a Muslim now. He says, "Oh Messenger of Allah, am I allowed to lie?" The Prophet ﷺ gave him permission. He said, "In this type of circumstance, you're allowed to lie." So he said, "I got it." So he goes straight to the army, and he comes to the Quraysh army, and he starts giving them a story. He says, "You know what's happening? I got intelligence that this Jewish tribe that you guys allied with you, they're actually planning on betraying you. They're actually planning on going and taking your soldiers and selling them to the Muslims, and they're actually with the Muslims the whole time. They were pretending the whole time." So like, come on, that's not true. He said, "Trust me, it's true, I'll give you proof." So he says, "Okay, fine, bring us proof." So he goes to the other Jewish tribe, and he comes up with a plan, and he tells them, "You know what? The Quraysh are actually planning on betraying you. They didn't want anything to do with you. The moment that they take over the Muslims, they're going to sell you, and they're going to get rid of you. So you're going to be killed." He said, "No, that's not true." He said, "Yeah." He said, "What's your advice then? You're such a good guy, you told us this. What's your advice?" He said, "My advice is, you demand from the Quraysh, we get some prisoners, we get some collateral. You give us some of your men, and in case, just in case, so that we know you're not going to betray us. In case you betray us, these men are dead. We get to take care of them." So then they're like, "That's a good idea. If we get some of the Quraysh people, they won't betray us because we took some of their guys. That's a great idea." So then he went back to the Quraysh and he told them, "You know what? The Jews, not only are they betraying you, they want some of your guys so that they can sell them to the Muslims to be killed." So they said, "No." So yeah, I'm telling you, watch. If they ask for it, you're going to know that I'm telling the truth. So then they go and they ask, they say, "Hey, we want some of your guys." That's it. The seed was planted, and they started, not trusting each other, and said, "Forget this. We're out of here, man." The Jews were like, "We're out of here. We can't trust these guys." And the Quraysh said, "Man, we lost these guys too, and there's a wind, and we're running out of supplies, and we have all these other problems." They say, "You know what? Let's just get out of here. There's no point in being here anymore." So they actually ended up leaving. They ended up leaving, and this was by the help of Allah. All of this happened after a month, and this all was by the will of Allah. So actually, with the help of Allah, all these Muslims were saved from fighting, but it was a symbolic victory for them. See, this is the thing. This, in the eyes of everyone in Arabia, as well as in the eyes of Muslims, was a victory. How is it a victory when you didn't actually inflict any damage? You managed to fend off and keep away an over 10,000 man army, all these tribes allied against you. This made things very, very different. It made people's perceptions in Arabia change completely. And that's why the city of Medina, throughout the life of the Prophet ﷺ, would never be attacked ever again after this point in time. This was the last time that the Muslim would be fighting in Medina. Okay, so inshallah, we'll take questions and then we'll take a break, I think. So the Muslims were saved from fighting. How many people died? A few people. Maybe a few, one stray arrow here and there, and that's it. The trench itself? Okay, there's no remnants of the trench. It's been filled up. Even I was looking at the maps, looking at Google Earth, checking different maps and all of that. The thing is, because of the construction in Medina and all of that, a lot of the hills have been destroyed. So they've been bulldozed and all of that, or they were exploded with dynamite in the past, like in the early 1900s and all of that. So even the layout of the city is different. So it's not going to be mapped the same way. Dimensions of the trench are mentioned in your book. You have the book? Yeah, so they're mentioned in your book. And the second one was what happened afterwards. The armies went back. Oh, okay. It's unknown whether they filled it right away or they waited a while. But the thing, this is the sand. This is the desert. So it's going to fill up by itself. There's sandstorms all the time. So somehow it's going to get filled. And remember, it was not around the entire city. It was just around the parts that were, unfortified. So it got filled up eventually. Yeah. No, because the thing is that in Uhud, there was a smaller army that they were fighting, right? Would there be more danger if they stayed in the city? No, not really, because the thing is, who'd they leave behind in the city? The elders, the children, the women, and all of that. So technically, outside of the city can be more dangerous if they decided to quickly run over there and just sack the city, then you can't defend from the inside. So it's actually more dangerous outside the city. It's not that easy. I mean, when you're in the middle of battle, it's not that easy to see who's with you and who's not with you. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ, the Muslims actually missed 3 or 4 prayers during this battle. They missed the prayer. That's how preoccupied they were. And they made it up. And that's why we get the ruling for making up of missed prayers. It's from Allah, of course. It's to teach people that, you know what? if you miss a prayer, you make it up. So this was a battle where they actually missed some prayers, and they made up those prayers afterwards. It was the only time the Prophet ﷺ missed them. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, made a dua against them. He said, you know what, they made me miss my prayers. Because that's how intense the battle was. That's how much you had to keep up. Even though technically in battle you're supposed to pray, this was just an example, the one example that came from the Prophet ﷺ that taught people how to make up their prayers. Afterwards there was the battle, there was a prayer battle. So even during battle you have to pray as well. But it just shows you how busy they were. So if they're going to keep track of the hypocrites and what they're doing, and at nighttime they're trying to, fend off this guy, and they say, oh, well, where's, Abdullah or something like that. Abdullah is at home sleeping, where you can't figure out exactly where he is. So it's not that easy to keep track of them. So if you imagine at that time being in a battle, it's not easy to keep track of people. So you mean what should happen to the hypocrites? See, here remember we talked about this before. The thing is, the Prophet ﷺ never identified the hypocrites clearly. He didn't. If he did, then they could be punished. If you don't identify them, they can't be punished. And why didn't he identify them? Somebody else. Why didn't he identify the hypocrites? To teach us to judge by actions and not by what's in someone's heart, because we can't judge. Exactly. Because we are the example. We're going to learn from this example. That's the reason. But they grow their food inside the city. Yeah, it's their own food. It's their own city. So they have enough food. Food-wise, they're fine. Because they're not outside in the desert. In the desert, things don't grow. But in the city, Medina is a very, green land. So they can grow stuff. All right, so dealing with the traders of Quraysh. Now, the threat from Mecca was over. The threat of the allies surrounding them was over, but there was no time to rest. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ continued. So it was not like all of a sudden the Muslims are now in the clear. Things need to be done. So the Prophet ﷺ immediately gathered up 3,000 soldiers. Right, their entire army, 3,000 soldiers, and he went immediately to go and take care of the Qurayza because they had betrayed the Muslims. So what did they do? They surrounded their fortress and they cut off all their supplies. Same thing you do when you besiege a fortress. Now the Qurayza, what did they do? Instead of giving up, instead of saying, you know what, we were pressured into giving up, or we're so sorry, please have mercy on us, something like that, they put up a fight. And they put up a fight for an entire month. For an entire month. That's how long the siege was, siege of Medina was. Now this is a much smaller siege within the city, but they put up a fight for an entire month, right? Because they knew what they'd done, and they didn't want to, they said, we're not going to negotiate, we'll go ahead and, hopefully, try and fight them off. So finally, they gave up, and they pleaded for mercy. Again, everyone tends to plead for mercy from the Prophet ﷺ. Right? Because they know of his leniency and all of that. Now the Prophet ﷺ had already been lenient with the 2 Jewish tribes. He had been lenient with the captives of the Badr. He'd been lenient with a lot of people, and it's sending a signal that, anyone can just betray the Muslims, and the Prophet ﷺ will just be lenient with them again. And they say, oh, we'll betray you again, and he'll be lenient with us. We'll just ask him very nicely, and everything's going to be fine. But this time, the difference between the crime of the Banu Qurayza and the crime of Qaynuqa and the crime of Nadir is very different. The Nadir, what did they try to do? They tried to assassinate and kill the Prophet ﷺ. Here, the entire Muslim community was in danger. They were about to exterminate the Muslims completely. Because if the Quraysh made it into Medina, they would have just wiped out everything. The entire ummah, the entire community of Muslims would be wiped out. So their crime is much greater than just trying to kill one person. It's much greater than that. So, they were guilty of breaking the covenant, and they were guilty of putting Medina completely in danger. So what did the Prophet ﷺ do? He still decided to be lenient with them. But his leniency was in a more, a more, what can you say? A more strict way, perhaps. You can say a stricter form of leniency. So his form of leniency was that they get to choose who is going to decide what's going to happen to them. So rather than us giving a verdict what's going to take place, you get to choose who you would like to issue the verdict. Obviously not from your own people. You can't choose your vice army or something like that. You have to determine. So what did the Qurayza do? Smart people as well. Before Islam came into Medina, there were 2 tribes, Aus and the Khazraj. And there were 3 main Jewish tribes, Qaynuqa, Nadir, and Qurayza. And what ended up happening, I mentioned this before, is that some of the Jewish tribes used to ally with the Aus, some of the Jewish tribes used to ally with the Khazraj. even though their own scripture prohibited them from allying with somebody else against one another. That's prohibited. But they did that anyways. So at that time, the Qurayza, before Islam, they used to be allied with the Aus tribe against the Khazraj. And they used to be good, good allies. They used to, fulfill, so they have a soft spot for each other. So the Qurayza decide, we're gonna choose somebody from the Aus, the leader of the Aus. He's gonna go ahead and decide what happens to us, knowing or hoping that he's gonna take it easy on us, right? So what did they do? They decided that, okay, we're gonna go ahead and choose a person from the Aus, and the Prophet ﷺ gets to choose who it's gonna be, one of the leaders from amongst them. So he chooses Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh. Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh was one of the leaders of the Aus, very respectable man, and the moment he appointed them, they thought, that's it, man, we're off the hook. Everything's gonna be fine because they had such a good relationship with him. But his decision was, he said that my judgment will be in accordance with your book, in accordance with the Torah. So what does the Torah say? The Torah says that the fighting men will be killed and the women and the children will be taken as prisoners of war. That's exactly what the Torah says. So this is exactly what it was, and nobody contested it. In fact, it says the books of history, some of the rabbis and some of the women, they came and they said, this is exactly the ruling of God. We deserve this punishment. And the interesting thing is, there's a lot of Jews throughout history, when they talk about their own people, they actually refer to themselves as cursed people sometimes. And even today, you'll find many Jews. Anyone met Jews that do that? No one's met them? Meet some rabbis. Go meet some rabbis. They actually mention that yes, as a people, the people as a whole have been a cursed people, right? So they mention that because they said that's why all the calamities, that's why we've always been suffering. We've always lived as minorities. We've always been doing this. So these people themselves have been documenting and saying, yes, this is something that we actually deserve because we didn't do what we should have been doing in the first place. So this was it. And anyways, the verses, Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 12 to 14. These are very interesting verses if you go back and you read them. Who looked them up, by the way? Who looked them up and read them? All right? Very, very good verses to memorize. Somebody comes and tells you, well, Islam says this, and Islam is violent, and Islam is this. So you know what? Let's pull out these verses, and let's go ahead and see what they talk about when it comes to war. Okay, so it's important to know these things. Okay, so now that you understand the context, by the way, of the three Jewish tribes, it's very important to understand historians try to go and show that the Prophet ﷺ was just trying to get the Jews out of Medina. All right, he was just trying to kick them out one by one. And unfortunately, what happens is all these new books on Sirah about the life of the Prophet and stuff that's being written by different people who kind of show themselves as being nice. They come on CNN and they're like, look, I wrote this book about the Prophet and showing him nicely and all of that. They usually throw some of this propaganda in there from the corner, and they usually end up doing it in stuff like Qurayza, Nadir, Qaynuqa, these type of things. So you have to be very, very careful about that, especially when you go read them now. Now you'll be able to read the entire story and you'll see the context. And sometimes they don't give the entire context and they're like, yeah, Islam couldn't exist with Judaism, so therefore he had to kick the Jews out of Medina because now the Muslims were becoming powerful and they couldn't coexist together. Okay, you just stripped the entire story of all the context that took place. So now that you know the context, remember this is very important and it's going to be on the test for sure. So remember the context and try to understand that because people are trying to twist this around. When you take out one variable, if you take Qaynuqa and you take the example of Qaynuqa and you say, you know what? Oh, they didn't break the treaty. There was no treaty. Let's not mention the treaty in the first place. Or one woman got assaulted and they go in and attack the entire city. Okay, well, that's not what happened. But if it makes it look like that's what happened, you say, oh, that's not fair. Because of one woman, they could have done something else. They didn't seek arbitration with the Prophet. Oh, well, why does the Prophet need to seek arbitration? Because you forgot to mention the covenant. So it's very important to remember all of these things. Unfortunately, theses, PhDs, masters theses are being written about this. And it's all being put on one side. So it's very important you know the entire story so that you can contextualize the event. Okay? The option was you have to pick some Muslims. You either choose someone from Makkah, or you choose someone from Khazraj, or you choose someone from Aus. So which one do you choose? You choose the one who had a really good relationship with you. And these people used to back each other. These people used to fight together. Remember, they're fighting side by side, so there's still some memories there. So you think that, okay, you know what, this is the most, and it's still like, it's not like as bad as what he could have determined. He could have put a worse verdict. Kill everyone. Kill everyone. Yeah. Yeah, they just killed the soldiers. There's a difference. You killed the soldiers. They didn't kill everyone. Right? They could have killed everyone if you wanted. So just, okay, let's take an example. If there was a Jew they could choose who accepted Islam. So let's say they choose Abdullah ibn Salam. What do you think he would have done? Look what they did to him, man. When they found out about his reputation, so they're not going to find favor with him either. Right? And the thing is, with the Jews, it would be even worse if they were to choose the Jews who became Muslim. Because the Jews would say, one, you know the Torah. They would have chosen the same verdict. And number two, you people know that he's a prophet. And you're still rejecting him. And I've been trying to tell you this the whole time, and you guys aren't listening. So they would definitely not choose a Jew. But that's true. They could have chosen a Jew, a former Jew. Inshallah. So we'll break, inshallah, and we'll come back here after the prayer, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.